Okay, thank you for the short intermission. Please continue.
Yeah, so Clonmel was probably the most significant event that happened after Wexford and Drogheda. As I say, towns have been mopped up all over the country, and some of them were yielding themselves up to Cromwell because they were pro-Cromwell, but they weren't in Clonmel. And one of the key aspects of this is that there was a very famous Irish family who were battlers, fighters on the continent, and they're the O'Neills from Tyrone. And one of them was Hugh Dove O'Neill, who had experience in Europe, and he was given the role of defending Clonmel. Now, when Cromwell pulled up outside Clonmel, he really didn't have any idea. He knew who Hugh Dove O'Neill was, but he had no idea what was about to happen. And as we mentioned earlier, all of the battles that Cromwell had been involved in any significant capacity. At Edge Hill, he arrived too late and didn't really have any time to influence it. But at Marston Moor and at Naseby and at lots of other smaller battles throughout England, he had won them. So now he's obviously taken Drogheda and Wexford and lots of other small towns, Kilkenny, New Ross, and so on. So there's no reason for him to think that Clonmel is going to be any different. But Clonmel was very different because O'Neill was wily. The topography of the area meant that where Cromwell had sat down before the town was that he could only see so far into the town. Anyway, he employed the same tactics that he had done at Drogheda and all of the other towns in Ireland, where they made breaches in the wall with cannon fire ready to be assaulted. And when he probably made a fundamental error, which is unlike him, insofar as when the breach was made, he decided to wait the next day. And when he went to Dunbar a few years later, he decided not to wait the next day when he attacked the Scots, and with fewer numbers, which was very unusual for Cromwell. He
fabulous had victory, absolutely fabulous.
Absolutely, an incredible victory, and all the Parliamentarian Army got medals to commemorate that particular event. But in Clonmel, he still had the upper hand number-wise. But anyway, they waited till the following day before they assaulted the breaches, or they sent soldiers in. But overnight, O'Neill and the defenders and the inhabitants, because this was a quintessential Irish town as well, they had a lot of problems with Cromwell, fashioned a kind of a cul-de-sac, a tunnel area where they all, anything that they could find, they made a wall each side so that nobody could escape through it. And at the end, there was a wall at the end as well. This is the way I see it, of anything that they could find. So when Cromwell sent in the foot soldiers, the forlorn hope, by the way, is the front line. I love that expression of the any civil war attacking army. So the forlorn hope were sent in, and straight away they were gunned down, they were sliced down, they were killed. It was a terrible killing field, because 1,000 of them or thereabouts, these numbers were always rounded up to 1,000, but certainly hundreds were slaughtered, obviously as part of the whole deal, by the defenders. And Cromwell was more than slightly put out, and he just wasn't sure exactly what to do. Now, this is the only time, and it's not well discussed or documented, at least not generally speaking, when Cromwell lost a battle. So he decides to send in more foot soldiers. But of course, the foot soldiers are looking at the other guys thinking, well, whoa, I don't think we're going to do that. So there's also insubordination. But the cavalry, for some strange reason, I don't know why, decided they'd step up, and they would. So they got off the horses and they attacked the breach. They went into the cul-de-sac, and again, the same kind of number, about 1,000 is reported, that they were all completely massacred by the defenders. And now Cromwell's, all these people, all these men going to their death, it was part of the lifestyle at that time. You were in an army, you could easily die, but it must have been horrendous. Anyway, so he didn't really know what his next move was going to be. What he didn't realise was that the defenders had it. They number-wise, the military occupants decided that they hadn't got anything else in them, so they absconded under the cover of darkness. And when the mayor came out to negotiate terms with Cromwell, Cromwell, because he was about to gain Clonmel with no more blood being shed, he immediately agreed to the terms. And when apparently it's come down through the centuries that when he said to the mayor, so the mayor told him, okay, he said, by the way, Hugh O'Neill is gone, there's nobody else there. And Cromwell goes, but why didn't you tell me that? He said, well, you never asked me.
So yeah, well done by the Irish there.
I think we got one up. Yeah,
that's it. I think still technically, if I'm being ultimately really critical, it's still an English victory because I believe we still took it.
No question.
Just because it's recorded as an English victory. Just because I am a big fan of Cromwell, so I don't want to start busting out crying hearing that he lost a battle.
Well, in fairness, the objective was to take Clonmel, and that's exactly what happened. They didn't defend it, they didn't keep it. Cromwell took it.
So 2,000 men down. We'll take it. We'll take it as a victory. You can keep our men. Don't worry about it.
Well, we did. One of the other things that about that particular war was it took another 3 years essentially till the rest of the country was completely in English hands. Now, one of the main reasons for that is because Cromwell left Ireland in May 1650. He only spent 9 months here.
9 months there,
yeah. So he didn't, he wasn't instrumental in taking the rest. The sort of shock and awe or the scorched earth campaign didn't really sustain. But the objective was the same. The result was the same insofar as they got the whole country. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things as regards Cromwell subsequent to the Irish conquest. And that is to do with the settlement or the plantation, whatever you want to call it, because, Protestantism was in the ascendancy from there on, and it's a very bad time in, the history of the Catholic Church in Ireland because it's oppressed. Penal laws are obviously still in vogue. Cromwell didn't invent them. They were in vogue a long time before he came in. The Mass was banished. He didn't decide that was happening. It was already, you couldn't say Mass. But one of the things he did was at every town and in lots of instances where he signed agreements with local landholders or governors of the town, which were in a lot of cases quite lenient. After he left, some of the parliamentarian officers reneged on those agreements, and where Cromwell got wind of this, he was very put out. And when he became protector, and it's documented, and there's a very prominent historian in this neck of the woods called John Cunningham who's done a lot of work on this. Irish landowners, when they petitioned Cromwell for restoration of their land, almost always he treated them with kindness and they expected that. And that's a point that's quite significant. They weren't going to Hitler-like individual, oh my God, why would we even do this? They expected, because they knew they'd get justice, because for whatever reason, and I don't know what the reasons were, he would give them back their land. And this was when he was protector. And now a lot of the dialogue that surrounds this is that, a protector is kind of like a king or a prime minister. It was quite unique, as we mentioned earlier. This whole arrangement was totally out of the blue. Nobody really knew how it was going to work. What's a protector? How does that work? Previously princes who were in waiting to become adults were protectors because they couldn't really make any decisions. But Cromwell could never really agree with the parliaments that he had assembled, and he assembled about 3 of them. One he dismissed, and so on, and not necessary to get into that. But he reluctantly, in my view, stepped in, and it was, as far as I understand, and I've read voraciously on this, it was like, if you like, he mentioned in between the living and the dead until something more permanent came along. He always thought this protectorate was going to be, at least in the early days, was going to be temporary, because they needed a figurehead. They needed some individual, because that's the way the tradition had been. There was always a monarch whom they doffed their hats or listened to for or wanted the direction from. And that's why, I think Cromwell struggled to agree with his parliaments. They were consistently not on the same page as he was, and even on his death, he still had a lot of trouble with Parliament, which is why Richard had trouble. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because it's not like he presided very directly over what we now call the Cromwellian plantation. In fact, that word Cromwellian should not be called the Cromwellian plantation, because immediately it implies that he was responsible. And when you take the fact that he subjugated the country, and the fact that he became protector, of course he's going to get blamed for everything. That's another interesting fact about all of this, is that, where there were injustices, he was insistent on trying to redress those, even when it came to Irish people. And again, his hatred of Catholics, the idea that he hated Catholics is complete nonsense. He had Catholic friends, and he often said throughout Ireland, throughout England, that he would not meddle with any man's conscience. And of course, his policy of religious toleration is well understood. He re-allowed the Jews back into England after being banished from 1290. He encouraged religious toleration everywhere. So when people look at Ireland and they see the whole idea that he hated Catholics and he killed them and all that, I mean, it's not. He didn't turn into a monster when he went to Ireland. What I'm trying to say is that he was always the honourable individual that he had been before he came to Ireland and subsequent to Ireland. People think that he lost his shiz in Ireland and it's just, oh yeah, there's a big blot, but let's not talk about that. But the point is, if you analyse all of the facts, you realise that he was the same guy throughout his life.
Exactly, and I'm really happy that you've transitioned into this now, because this is what I wanted the final section of this video to be on. So, if we're just looking at Cromwell as a character, he's born in 1599. He's in Huntingdon. I'm gonna do this very fast and long story short way here now. He was born to Robert and Elizabeth Cromwell. Ultimately, he came from a very humble environment and humble beginning. He was essentially a commoner. When his father died, he sold off his inheritance and actually, was running a farmstead in St. Ives. So, this gentleman, this commoner, he's at one of the...
He's a yeoman now.
Exactly, yeah. And that builds a lot of character, and that resonates with a lot of the commoners in England, especially even today. He suffered from depression. He was feeling purposeless, and that ultimately led to a born-again experience with the Puritan faith. And then that has led into his becoming a member of Parliament. He became a fantastic military commander. He never lost a battle. He had the undying love and loyalty from his troops. He introduced, the salary, paying the soldiers, feeding them properly. He introduced commoners being able to work their way up from the ranks and become officers, which was unheard of at the time, because you had to be a pompous toff from a rich family to become an officer.
So true.
And then he's gained the highest office in the land as Lord Protector, coming from a commoner. He was even offered the crown of England and turned it down, because he was like, why would I accept this from what I've been fighting to get rid of, basically, this tyrant regime.
What's not to like?
Exactly, and that's why I believe, and that's why I love him. What a fantastic character. He created a republic. It was essentially the start of the British Empire. I know, like, Tudor and Elizabethan was ultimately the start, but this is where it really kicked off into full fruition, during the Protectorate. And he was just an absolutely fantastic character, and he fought for people such as John Lilburne, otherwise known as Freeborn John. He coined the term freeborn rights, defining them as rights to which every human being is born, opposed to what was given to you by government or human law. And that's why the left and right both claim him, because he was your original liberal. He was the original social justice warrior, fighting for people's rights, fighting for the commoners, trying to abolish this, Richmond stuff. And when I'm reading about him and when I'm learning about it, I'm like, how can you not love this character? And then that's why I'm so offended by the injustices of his escapades in Ireland and in Scotland, saying that he was this tyrant who killed these people, when it wasn't actually true. He is literally the Superman of the 17th century. And that's leading to the question of what I want to ask you now, which is, why do you think personally, more people, especially young people, because I ask my peers, I ask my friends, I ask my work colleagues, who's Oliver Cromwell? They can't even tell me who he is. They don't know who he is. Never mind the 17th century. But why is the 17th century not more widely known today?
I think it's the complication. I think that it's a very complicated scenario, and I also think there's a double-edged sword there, insofar as that we've talked about the atrocities that were perpetrated. I think people tend to try and avoid that. I think there's a controversy, there's a controversial aspect to that. I also think that deep down and maybe subconsciously or subliminally, the fact that the Civil War is a significant part of that. I don't know that people want to, if you compare the Tudor period, which is much more exciting, people are reluctant to delve into the 17th century. Personally, I think the 17th century knocks all the other centuries completely off their perch, because so much happened. It's just interesting to hear you say, I have to temper, as an Irishman, I have to temper sometimes my opinion on Cromwell, because if I hear myself saying the words, that I admire him, or that I think he was a great man, and I rarely say that. In fact, I've never said all those things, either of those things. But what I do believe is that he has been significantly mischaracterized. I also believe that he's, like I said before, he's the victim of a historical miscarriage of justice. But the when you and I are having this conversation, the frustration for me is that the message isn't getting out there. And I mean in Ireland. I mean, because there's no question that we're going to get a lot of negative comments from people. I'd like there to be much more acerbic discussion or debate, instead of something you learned at school that you think is historical research, because you're Republican or nationalist, and that's enough. That's not enough, because we know that most of the stuff we learned at school is certainly in De Valera's Ireland, which is the Ireland that I grew up in. What we were told, what they wanted us to know. So all those things are part of it. As regards his impact on the world and what he did, it's essentially rags to riches. It's like log cabin to White House. It's an incredible life story. And I have to tell you, Marcus, I can't think of any other individual throughout history who made the impact that he did, coming from where he was. And it was circumstance, it was his personality. I can't really see that, like military dictator, we're not even going to get into that, because he wasn't a military dictator. By the definition of what that expression is, like if you read the details of what happened chronologically, when he came back from Ireland and the rump was still in place, and during that hiatus of because it was assumed these are the people who he had pledged all his battles to. This was Parliament, and he just assumed, okay, well, this is going to be fine. So he stepped away. He didn't push his luck. He called, I'll just fade into the background here, and Parliament will take over, and everything will be fine. But that's not what happened. This rump Parliament were all crooks and thieves and whore masters, as he called them, and they only wanted self-gain. They wanted to self-perpetuate. And he's gone, oh my God, what am I going to do now? So he dissolved them, and of course, by dissolving Parliament, on a self-righteous journey or whatever he was doing, he, because of his relationship with the army, suddenly found himself in an unprecedented place, as by default having control, because whoever controlled the army controlled the country. But again, it was it was standing up for the rights of the downtrodden, because it was very clear that Parliament weren't going to do anything but bad. And of course, anyway, so that's why I don't see him as a tyrant. I don't see him as a military dictator. I see him as a reluctant overachiever, and somebody who made a very significant, and dare I say it, positive impact on the world, with the exception of his Irish campaign to a point, insofar as that, he subjugated us. But because after that, any king that came along and any monarch, they came along with reduced powers, to the point where now they're only a figurehead. And without Cromwell, maybe that might not have happened. Who knows? But the history would have. Sometimes it can be a very fine thing. If Richard Cromwell had been any good, we could have the House of Cromwell today. God knows what that would have been like.
No, I completely agree, and I dare say, Mr. Reilly, that he was a great man. And as you mentioned about having the backing of the army, he had the backing of the army because, number one, they loved him and supported him, and number two, he was supporting them financially and spiritually. And because he was a great person, he protected the civil and religious liberties of. He didn't particularly agree with the Quakers. He didn't particularly agree with the Jews. But because he respected the right of freedom of expression and freedom of religion and knew that that was a force for good, he tried his best, even though he was a Protestant and a Puritan. Just a fantastic character. So moving on now and being a little bit personal with you, Tom. So just to give you a little bit of a background where I've come from, like, historically, and how I've gained that passion. I didn't go to school. I didn't attend high school. I haven't got any GCSEs. I don't have a degree, and I have zero formal education. But what I do have is, it is over 10 years of an unbelievable passion and an unbelievable will to read and retain information in regards to history, specifically British and English history. And that passion arose from when I was in my youth and my early teens. I was a wrestler, judo player, boxer, and when I wasn't training, I was looking at who were the best fighters. So as I'd looked at who were the best fighters at modern day, I was looking at who were the best fighters then of previous day. And I ran into characters such as William Marshall, the greatest knight who ever lived, Richard I, otherwise known as Richard the Lionheart, Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, and the King of Jerusalem, Baldwin IV, the Leper King. And I read about these people capturing Jerusalem, conquering Scotland, conquering the 100 Years' War with Henry V. And I just admired these great strong men, and I thought, these are the top fighters, and I'm so lucky to be born an Englishman, because I'm born in a country where we have the best fighters that there's ever been. And that just fueled the flames of my historical passion, and that's how it's ultimately led to Oliver Cromwell. Because strangely, I wasn't taught about Oliver Cromwell. Nobody mentioned him to him. Sometimes knights and words like that came out of people's mouths, but in the northern English town that I grew up in, nobody said Oliver Cromwell ever. They might have said King Arthur, for example, but they'd never said Oliver Cromwell. And when I learnt about this guy, I thought, hang on a minute, Oliver Cromwell started off as a commoner, became the Lord Protector, what a cool title, and also smashed everybody who he fought and never lost. And actually had war and battle experience in himself, unlike staying, behind the front line and, protecting himself. He had this military experience and he fought himself. I've read that you're a serious runner, which I'm very embarrassed because you're older than me and you out-exercise me and outrun me. So, but how did you get this, passion for history, and how did you start?
Well, firstly, I'm very intrigued with what you've just told me. I would never have guessed any of that. That's incredible. And it just emphasizes the fact that, you don't have to have a degree. You don't have to go through third level education to have either a passion or a significant knowledge of history. It should not be the preserve of academics or those who have done that. And of course it isn't. But academics tend to be, in my experience, exceptionally dismissive. just to get to your question in a second, but what also bothers me significantly is, and I'd like this to, get out there somewhere. It really annoys me that even still today in 2021, that despite the conversation that you and I have just had, the facts that I've outlined, that academics today refuse to, and I mean in the main, we're not talking, that this is a minority opinion. Out there, for some reason, they don't seem to want to embrace this notion of a rehabilitated Oliver Cromwell. And I find that terribly, terribly frustrating. Because it's absolutely the case that I keep putting it out there. Please, somebody shut me up. Challenge me, tell me I'm wrong, explain to me where I've got this guy completely misunderstood, because I haven't. And where it came from was simply that I come from Drogheda. I was born there, I was bred and buttered there, as we say. I used to hang around where the breach was made in the walls. And I remember you saying when I was a teenager, saying to my friends, loads of people were killed around here. I wonder what's the story. And like you have got this part of your brain that needs to investigate and find out and see and understand and interpret. And that's exactly what I did. And so that's where it comes from. It's simply from coming from the town of Drogheda. Now, I'm in a very unusual animal. I don't know that there's anybody out there, I make these very general statements, but, who I've certainly made a huge impact in my short time of defending Cromwell in the last 25 years, because I know this. And I know this with my books, that discerning people with no agenda accept what I say. The problem is that those with an agenda and with the power to open so many more doors where it should be accepted by Irish people everywhere, they don't and they won't, and then that frustrates me. And I've got very personal experience of that. Even recently, I tried to involve a couple of historians in that to challenge the publisher of that book that I mentioned, who says that 3,500 inhabitants died at Drogheda. They wouldn't even respond to my email, which I find incredible. And I just don't understand what's going on. Maybe it's something we're missing, Marcus. Maybe we're missing that aloofness of academia that they can keep, because I don't want it. That's just not me. I believe that I'm righting it wrong. I believe that I'm right to do it. I do squirm when you say that the English were the best fighters in the world, because Ireland aren't too bad at fighting either. But that's not a conversation for today. As I said before, I'm extremely proud of the fact that I'm Irish, but I'm also extremely proud of the fact that I have found this fundamental flaw in the teaching of Irish history, and that as a non-expert, I will fight this battle until the day I die. I just wish there was somebody coming after me who could carry the mantle. And I know this is probably going to sound crass, but I just need to predicate this by saying I don't take royalties for my books. I don't, because it's the message, not the money. I've got no interest in money whatsoever. I don't care how many books sell. I always tell the publisher to keep the money. So of the non-academic books that I've written, the non-fiction, they sell reasonably well, but the message is not getting through. So what I decided to do was I decided to write a novel about Cromwell's life. I can't even remember if we had this conversation, but I would encourage people to buy it. Again, it's nothing to do with me or gain. It will be history's gain if people understand the real Cromwell. It's called The Protector: The Fall and Rise of Oliver Cromwell. It's published by John Hunt Publishing. It's available on Amazon and all good bookstores. And I know how commercial that sounds, but I'm frustrated insofar as this is the only platform I have left. Well, there are others obviously, but this is a reasonably potentially big one. In terms of fiction, I'm trying to get to a different audience, and when people read it, they seem to be impressed. So it's faction as opposed to fiction, but that's what I have resorted to, unfortunately, to try and get the message out. So that's the background to me.
Lovely, no, and it's great for you to say that, and again, it's great to hear it from an Irishman, because sometimes when you listen to myself, I can come across a little bit biased. It's more pride than it is bias, because with everything that I do say, there's fundamentally and foundationally, it all comes from facts and from truths. I just kind of spice it up a little bit and make it a little bit more controversial than what it needs to be when I say that English are the best fighters. But the Irish are also fantastic fighters. But,
there's the patronising English, you see?
Exactly, and we can't change. I'm so sorry. All I can do is apologise. But,
that's okay. It's in your DNA.
Exactly. But it's and so's Irish, strangely, as well. So I don't know what's going on there.
True.
But yeah, it's just, it's fantastic to hear it from you, and just you are a champion of this subject, and I'm glad you've mentioned it, because I didn't want to mention it just out of respect for you, but when I originally reached out to you to have this conversation, and I said to you I'm more than happy to pay a fee, and you was like, I'm not motivated by money at all, it's not your motivation, and I really appreciated that, because now I know that your motivations are the history, the facts, and getting the message out there, and I really appreciate that. And I purchased your book off Amazon, and I encourage anybody else to purchase your books, because they are fantastic reads, full of facts, very informative, and if you want to know about Oliver Cromwell, and especially in Ireland, get it from an Irishman himself. Don't hear it from me, the biased, terrible Englishman. Hear it from the Irishman. But absolutely.
Yeah, just this Irishman, by the way, because other Irishmen have written stuff that's just not right.
Well, to be honest, I mentioned that to you, didn't I? I get a lot of trepidation when I pick up an Oliver Cromwell book and it's got an Irish name.
Yeah.
Not because I'm prejudiced, but because I almost know what is written in that book. I can already tell you word for word what is written. What is written is number juggling. Figures of innocents that were killed, and how terrible Oliver Cromwell and the English were.
Well, there's a book entitled, again, this is easily Googleable. It's called Oliver Cromwell, the Most Hated Man in Ireland? ? I don't even know if it's a question mark. It may not be a question mark, but
or an exclamation mark.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I am the antidote to that. And while my task is Herculean, I firmly believe and I always say this, and if there's anybody out there, like I say, you put your comments in about how crap this is and how awful I am, that's fine. Try not to get personal, because that's not very helpful. But until somebody can explain to me in academic terms and point to evidence, contemporary evidence, that my work is completely wrong, and that and there may well be, Marcus, there may well be some evidence out there on the dusty shelves of obscurity that hasn't been in the public domain yet. If it's there, to in other words, to justify civilian atrocities at Drogheda and Wexford, well then I'm fine with that. But until there is, all those stories are complete speculation without evidence, essentially total nonsense.
Yep, you have thrown down the historical gauntlet, and you, like me, Tom, if somebody has information out there, factual historical evidence, I want to see it. I don't want to be believing something that isn't true. But that is precisely the opposite of what we are doing right now. We're talking about the facts, we're talking about the evidence, we're talking about what really happened to the best of our knowledge and the best of our information and evidence. And if somebody has anything to the contrary of that, then please display it, and please let me know, because I want to know.
Yeah, they will, by the way. They'll try, because I suspect that people are very passionate about this subject as well. But the point is that all of the evidence, when you take it all together, you can only come to one conclusion, and that is, final three words if we're heading this way: Cromwell was framed.
Exactly, and I'm just going to hold it up at the camera now, because I currently have this book in my possession. This is actually my favourite one of your books. It's just really is absolutely fantastic. I've already said it, purchase these books. They're very informative, and I have learnt more from these books from what I have of the generic ones, from Antonia Fraser, etc. With these ones, just because it's coming from an Irishman, and it's dispelling these common and widely believed myths. So if we
That's interesting. I just love Antonia Fraser. I pick it up often and start the whole thing and go right through to the end because it's quite a tome.
Yeah.
But that's what set me off as well. I just love that book, and thank you very much for saying certainly about Ireland. There's more detail about Ireland, but as regards Cromwell's life, Antonia Fraser, guys, you need to buy it.
Yeah, and also if we're blowing people's trumpets here, who I will be having on the podcast soon as well, Ronald Hutton, he's released a really fantastic book, which is The Making of Oliver Cromwell.
He's a fan.
He's a fan. Oh, well, I'm sure I'll be to mention him to you tomorrow.
Yeah,
but yeah, really fantastic.
And I'm a fan of his.
Yeah, really fantastic character. To be honest, I love Ronald Hutton not because of Oliver Cromwell. It's because of actually his pagan and pre-English history that he actually does. Something that we really share and have in common with the Irish. People think the English aren't Celtic. We are 50% Celtic. And we share that. But that's going to be fantastic. But staying on topic, that's why I wanted you here first, Mr. Tom Reilly. Don't tell Ronald, but you are one of my favourite historians. I really love your work. And just to end it with this before I thank you for everything, are you a royalist or are you a parliamentarian?
I am a complete parliamentarian.
Fantastic. So am I. Right, well, we're on the same war here. Let's hope that Mr. Hutton isn't a royalist tomorrow, okay? Otherwise, we're in some serious trouble. But again, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this. It's been 2 hours now, if not over.
I know.
And it feels like I've been talking to you for 10 minutes. I wish we had more time, but I hope you will accept an invitation in future for another talk on the subject or potentially on another one.
Would love to. Because stand by for people calling this. Sorry, I beg your pardon, Mark. Stand by for people calling this some sort of love fest, and that we're the mutual respect has gone crazy. But when it comes to Cromwell, trust me, Irish people are going to have very different opinions that you and I have just said.
No, I know that, but if we can just talk from factually and historically accurate, then do you know what? I'm happy to take the battle, take the hits.
Excellent.
But thank you so much again, Mr. Reilly. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've met one of my heroes here. I can die happy and write it off my my bucket list now.
You're embarrassing me. Thank you.
I really appreciate that, but thank you very much.
Not at all.